Adolf Hitler launches a massive surprise attack in the dead of winter. Nazi forces smash through the weakest spot in the Allied line. They capture thousands of American soldiers across the Ardennes forest and completely surround the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne. Patton vows that his Third Army will ride to the rescue. As conditions worsen, Patton and his men charge into a frozen hell. Knowing that they may be the Allies' only hope in the West. General George S. Patton. His bold attacks are legendary. See the war as he saw it and ride along with his hard-fighting troops as they battle their way through World War II. On this 360-degree battlefield, Patton's enemies could be anywhere and everywhere. There's nowhere to run when the war is all around. Patton 360, Battle of the Bulge. 6 months after D-Day, the Allies are set for a final push into Germany. All the top generals think the Nazis have had it. But Hitler hasn't given up. He's just hit the Allied line in a weak spot. American reserves have been pushed back for miles, creating a huge bulge in the Allied front lines. George Patton's 4th Armored Division is driving north to push back in what is to become known as the Battle of the Bulge.
Patton was ultimately drawn into this battle in a very dramatic and important way, and in a way that some people might call his finest hour.
December 23rd, 1944, Flatzberhof, Luxembourg. Captain Jimmy Leach's company in the 37th Tank Battalion grinds its way towards a train station half a mile ahead. Leach has already been right in the middle of the action for months, fighting with the 4th Armored since Normandy.
The snow was about knee-deep. As we approached Flatzberhof, and I was the advance guard, I commenced receiving fire from the left front, and they knocked out one of my tanks and killed 2 of my soldiers.
The fire is pouring in from a tree line on the left, and possibly from the far side of the railroad tracks. "100 yards due north." Leach spots the enemy's chief firepower, 2 German self-propelled anti-tank guns, along with a Sherman tank.
The American Shermans obviously have been captured by the Germans because it's had a big Balkan cross painted on the side of the turret.
My first round hit the nearest railroad track toward me.
The gunner of a Sherman tank aims through a periscope sight some 14 inches above the bore of the gun. At a distance, the aim line and projectile eventually converge, but at very short ranges, the gun shoots lower than the aim line.
I told the driver, move up a little bit. Boom. Hit the second track. Oh, God. Can't be. Driver, move up a little further. He did this. But he finally was able to get beyond the track. We put a round or 2 into these self-propelled guns in this tank, too.
The biggest danger for Patton's soldiers at Flatzberhof is now gone. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. 1 mile north, in the village of Bigonville, German paratroopers are prepping for a bloodbath. The coming battle is just one of hundreds that have already been raging across the Ardennes forest for a week. Now it's up to Patton and his men to see if they can turn the tide back in the Allies' favor, as it was before the battle began 7 days earlier. Flashback, December 16th, 1944. Despite having slowed the Allied advance in the west, Adolf Hitler is losing ground on all sides. To the east, Soviet forces are on the move, and to the south, American and British troops continue to push up through the Italian boot. George S. Patton's Third Army is in the Saar region of Germany, beginning an attack on the German border at the fortified Siegfried Line.
Third Army is still pushing forward. Patton's philosophy is to keep the Germans off balance in his sector, negating their ability to do anything to him.
With Patton keeping the pressure on, the Germans strike another sector further north with a monster blow. On the morning of December 16th, they smash into the entire Ardennes region at once, with 20 divisions across a 60-mile front.
It's where units went to sort of go to a quiet area to get sort of acclimatized and used to, maybe some small skirmishes before they were employed elsewhere.
The Ardennes separates the two main Allied army groups, so to Hitler's thinking, it's a perfect spot for a surprise body blow.
The idea was to drive a wedge between Montgomery's 21st Army Group and Bradley's 12th Army Group, separating the two, with the hope to forcing the surrender of the entire 21st Army Group in the north.
At the same time, Hitler hopes to grab the port of Antwerp. That's where the Allies are now getting their supplies.
The Germans had their backs against the wall. It was clear that the Russians were coming, and there weren't enough Germans to stop them. So Hitler decided he was going to win on the Western Front so that he could free up all those forces and then turn on the Russians.
In the north, the 6th Panzer Army swarms in and shocks the American divisions there. In the south, the German 5th Panzer Army overwhelms 2 regiments of the 106th Infantry Division, capturing more than 7,000 GIs. Hitler's juggernaut is helped along by some awesome firepower, the King Tiger tank.
Now, this is a modified, souped-up, more armor-covered tank. It still has the 88mm cannon, but the armor on the tank is a lot thicker and it's going to be much more survivable on the battlefield.
While Patton is more than 100 miles to the south, the 5th Panzer Army drives westward. It surrounds the village of Bastogne, Belgium. Americans hold the town, and it's a key hub in the Ardennes Road network. Trapped inside is the 101st Airborne Division and part of the 10th Armored. To make matters worse, the troops aren't sure who to trust. Word is, English-speaking Germans dressed as Americans and led by notorious Nazi commando Otto Skorzeny have infiltrated the lines.
Their job ranged from everything from killing officers to knocking down signs to blowing up bridges or capturing bridges, so that the Germans had a better advantage in punching through.
When it's clear to the Allies how massive the attack really is, Ike calls Patton, Bradley, and British commanders to Verdun. They have to figure out a response. Before Patton leaves, he pulls some of his units out of their battle in the Saar and begins moving them north. He's sure his army will be ordered in that direction.
Patton's probably thinking, you might be able to catch a few of my forces off guard. Watch out. I'm going to come up there and give you a surprise of my own.
On December 19th in Verdun, when Ike asks Patton how soon his army can disengage from battle, turn north, and get moving, Patton tells him he can attack with 3 divisions in 2 days.
Everyone in the room is shocked. One of the witnesses says there was a shuffling of feet and some nervous churns in people's seats. The Americans are basically thinking, George has bitten off more than he can chew. The British in the room are going, these Americans don't know what warfare is about.
Ike tells Patton not to joke with him, that such a move would be impossible.
And Patton immediately responds. He says, I'm not kidding. My army is ready. I can have 1 corps going. In 48 hours, I can have another corps right behind it.
You want to talk about getting the guy fired up? Just say impossible to Patton. He's going to sit there and say, what? Impossible? Just watch me.
Patton leaves the meeting with a mission: relieve Bastogne, 140 miles away, as soon as possible. And over the next day and a half, he tirelessly visits each of his divisions to help quickly work through the nuts and bolts of the 140-mile move.
Figuring out what roads they needed to take, calculating fuel consumption, all the minute details of just a symphony of work to be done, Patton handles like the perfect maestro.
But there's one full-size challenge Patton's incredible energy can't overcome: bad weather. Sleet, snow, and cold are making everything harder, and poor visibility is keeping support and scout planes grounded.
It was really unclear what Third Army would face as it conducted this counterattack. A way to mitigate that uncertainty is with aerial reconnaissance, and Patton didn't have that available to him.
The weather is less of a problem for today's radar-equipped reconnaissance planes.
If we had had, during the Battle of the Bulge, something like the AC-130 gunship, an aircraft that can get at altitude and can hover and can look down through the weather and can see the enemy on the battlefield and see the enemy on the battlefield at night. Imagine what a difference it would have made to have had that kind of weapon at that time.
But Patton's army will have to advance blind. So for the drive to Bastogne, Patton puts his favorite tank unit, the 4th Armored Division, at the tip of his spear.
They were called Roosevelt's butchers by the German army because they were so effective. And the Germans thought all of them had been prisoners, had been criminals, and had been let out of jail in order to be in the American army. Of course, none of this was true. But the members of the 4th Armored Division certainly played that up because they thought any advantage against the Germans was good, and if the Germans were afraid of them, so much the better.
But the 4th Armored has never faced a nightmare like this as it races into one icy battle after another. December 22nd, 1944, Day 7 of the Battle of the Bulge. General George S. Patton's 4th Armored Division is fighting its way north in the middle of Europe's worst winter in decades. Their mission: to relieve the 101st Airborne Division, trapped by Nazi forces in Bastogne. The 4th Armored has fought its way through France, winning its reputation as one of the best American units under the leadership of General John Tiger Jack Wood.
Major General Wood was a commander who was formed in Patton's own image. He was a guy who believed in attacking and never giving the enemy a chance to prepare a defense.
There's just one problem. Wood and his boss, infantry-minded 12th Corps Commander Mattinetti, have been at each other's throats for months. While aggressive, Wood also looks after his men. He publicly slams Eddie for keeping the 4th on the front lines for too long during the grueling fighting in the Saar Valley.
General Mattinetti had a schedule. He wanted the 4th Armored Division to go forward. And General Wood says, no way. These kids need a rest, and that's what we're going to have. And it's not going to be any other way.
Wood's insubordination finally forces Patton to make one of his most difficult decisions of the war. On December 1st, Patton relieves Wood of command, calling Wood's feud a case of nervous exhaustion. The news has a devastating effect on the 4th Armored Division.
When he was relieved of his command, it was like a body blow. The two things that hit me the most during the war was the news that Wood was relieved and the news that President Roosevelt had died.
Now the 4th Armored is heading into the biggest battle on the Western Front, and their beloved commander has been sent packing.
In war, you have to be able to push yourself beyond what you think you can do. You're tired, you're hungry, you're cold. But these soldiers kept moving forward. Now that's a testament to the American fighting spirit.
Hal Mayforth, a 21-year-old sergeant from Boston, is in a cavalry recon unit at the front of the division's Combat Command B. He endures the miserable conditions in an armored car instead of a tank.
At night, the only thing that I took off were my shoes and my combat jacket. And I think I used the combat jacket as a pillow. And inside my sleeping bag, I put my carbine to keep that warm. And I put my shoes inside the sleeping bag because if I left them out, I could never put them on again. They would have frozen like boards.
Dawn, December 23rd, 1944, Chaumont, Belgium. Combat Command B is 12 miles south of Patton's objective, the surrounded town of Bastogne. In command is Albin Erzik, a former horse cavalryman from Salem, Massachusetts.
We traveled all night, and just about a little after daylight, on the 23rd, we hit the outskirts of a place called Chaumont.
As Patton's men roll towards the outskirts of town, Hal Mayforth's recon unit is in the lead. Light tanks of the 8th Battalion are right behind them. But just as they top a rise that slopes down to Chaumont, "700 yards ahead, a self-propelled German tank destroyer searches for another victim. Mayforth's platoon leader, Lieutenant Jim Bennett, leaps into action.
Jim Bennett, who received a battlefield commission, jumped from his armored car onto the deck of a light tank to point out the position of the German anti-tank gun. And that was when the vehicle found its range and wiped out the tank and wiped out Jim Bennett as well.
Soon, more German guns open fire. Sergeant Hal Mayforth is farther back in the column. Here, Germans have opened up on Patton's soldiers from a forest on the right side of the road.
You could see flashes of, as it turned out, there were German paratroopers on the edge of the wood firing. And the return fire that we made was just in the general vicinity of the gun flashes.
Ahead of Mayforth, his friend John D. Batista attempts to return fire with his .50 caliber machine gun.
I didn't have any cover on that .50 caliber. I wouldn't dare have the cover in case you need it right away, you know. But in the evening, when that Siberian high come through, that wet .50 caliber froze. It fired one round and didn't eject because it didn't throw the bolt back far enough to pick up another round.
So he urinated on it, and I witnessed the whole thing. And it really amazed me that under dire circumstances, he could get his plumbing to function.
This just goes to show you American ingenuity at its finest. The American soldier faced with a problem, he's gonna figure a way to get out of it. I mean, peeing on a .50 cal, come on.
In the next minutes, the Shermans of the 8th Tank Battalion, the first unit behind the recon company, rush forward to the fight. But 800 yards ahead, 15 Sturmgeschütz 3 tank destroyers belch fire and steaming lead. The Sturmgeschütz 3 is built on a tank chassis, giving it a top speed of 25 miles per hour. Its high-velocity 75mm main gun makes it an efficient tank killer. But the firepower of Erzik's tanks is enough to drive the surviving Stugs from the field. Despite the Nazi ambush, Combat Command B now holds the high ground, overlooking Chaumont.
So at that point, I pulled back and I said that we can't go down the road like we've been going. This is going to require a coordinated attack. So I planned an attack where I had C Company over on the left. It was wide open. I was going to have C Company go around the flank so they could protect B Company, which was going to attack down the road into Chaumont. And I had A Company move on a ridge on the right.
Elements of the 10th Armored Infantry are brought forward to join the attack, along with armored artillery. Patton's men aren't going to be surprised this time.
And it was a little after noon that we launched the attack. And it was a fight, B Company going down the town, firing where they needed to fire. They had the armored infantry. It's a very small town, cluster buildings, and there were a lot of Germans dug in.
After heavy fighting, Erzik's unit pushes through the town. The fight for Chaumont is brutal. The tankers and riflemen of the 4th Armored Division start to get the upper hand. But Patton's warriors are about to slam into a major roadblock on the drive to Bastogne. December 23rd, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge is raging. Hitler has gambled on a massive push to drive a wedge into the Allied armies on the Western Front. And the eye of the Nazi storm is centered around the town of Bastogne, Belgium. General Patton has ordered the 4th Armored to break through the enemy and relieve the 101st Airborne. Right now, the men of Combat Command B are in the thick of the fight, forcing their way through Chaumont, Belgium.
B Company got to the end of the road and it headed up to a place called Grandrue, which would be the next town. And just as they were getting ready to make the turn, all hell broke loose. We had a massive, massive counterattack.
German paratroopers and enemy armor in the form of massive Jagd Tigers mounting an awesome 128mm gun tear into the Americans.
They couldn't turn around because there's not room to turn around. You never expose your tank. So I started backing up. I reached the point where I said, we're absolutely safe now. I think we're out of range. So I turned the turret around. At that point, we were hit by a massive jolt. Our tank was hit so dramatically that the 37, 38-ton tank was pushed as though 2 giant hands had pushed it. And all of us went sprawling.
The turret is cracked, but the round did not penetrate, and none of Patton's tankers are killed. Erzik and his crew can't believe their luck. It turns out the round hit a protruding section of the turret next to the antenna well.
But ricocheted off. Someone look out for me that day.
While the 8th Tank Battalion regroups and plans a coordinated attack, Combat Command B comes to a temporary halt. The brief pause allows Erzik to survey the devastating losses.
All of B Company, all their tanks were damaged, a lot of casualties to the 10th Armored. I'll never forget, it was the worst day of my life. I've never forgotten Chaumont on the 23rd of December. "12
miles ahead of Erzik's battered unit, soldiers holding out in the village of Bastogne are also struggling, hoping that General Patton can pull off a miracle and rescue them. One problem infantrymen on the perimeter are having is that the cold is affecting their M1 rifles. Introduced in 1936, the M1 rifle self-feeds from an 8-round clip. When a round fires, explosive gases cause the ejection of the spent cartridge and the loading of a fresh round. However, extreme cold causes the gun oil used on the moving parts to harden and gum up the open action. The 101st is also short on men.
They needed every rifleman on the line. So on the 23rd, a couple of days before Christmas, the word came down that, we're not getting relieved right away here. We need help. So the commanders went to the hospitals and asked for volunteers. And all the guys who could carry a weapon, anybody who could walk, anybody who could fight, got up, even though they were wounded, and went out to fight the line.
The attacking Germans are under the command of General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, a no-nonsense Eastern Front veteran. But General Tony McAuliffe, in charge at Bastogne, is a fighter just like Patton.
The Germans, realizing they have the whole unit surrounded, send a messenger through the lines with a message to General McAuliffe to surrender.
McAuliffe hands a one-word response to Luttwitz's messenger that simply reads, "Nuts."
As the German's leaving, he looks at it and says to his American guard, "Nuts, what does that mean?" And the American says, "It means go to hell."
Luttwitz is incensed and pours on the artillery fire. It's clear now that this is a fight to the death. If Patton doesn't break through to Bastogne, the 101st Airborne is going to be wiped out. December 24th, 1944, Luxembourg City. George S. Patton is thrilled this morning by the sight of clear skies with planes aloft. He knows his ground troops will need close air support if they're going to break the German noose surrounding Bastogne. He radios General McAuliffe. Christmas Eve present coming, hold on. Patton heads to the front to keep the pressure on his units. He's got 3 combat commands pressing ahead. All 3 are hitting stiff German resistance. But he's promised Eisenhower he'll be in Bastogne any day now, and his reputation is on the line.
Patton had always said, in war, men are nothing, man is everything. He really believed that the individual with that sort of focused attention and aggressiveness can achieve great things in warfare. He is out in a Jeep every day, pushing troops forward.
His Jeep driver, 20-year-old Californian Francis Sanza, remembers Patton's words to him the day 3rd Army headed for Bastogne.
He says, "Are you ready?" I didn't say nothing. Then he says to me, "Are you afraid to die?" And I looked at him, I said, "I didn't come here to die." He says, "I'm going to tell you why." He said, "They're going to try to get me, but they're going to kill you to get me."
Patton is so sure his Jeep will take fire, he orders Sanza to empty the gas from the 5-gallon can in back and replace it with water.
"You understand," he says to me, "because in case somebody would shoot at a Jeep, it'd blow it up, there's gas in that tank."
On Christmas Eve, as Patton rolls out of Luxembourg, 40 miles north of him, the 37th Tank Battalion is rolling into the village of Bigonville. As the battalion halts to split up, Captain Jimmy Leach takes a flesh wound to the head.
But it didn't break the skull, even though it bruised it. Oh, God, it was a knot there.
But his battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, isn't aware Leach has been shot and orders his company to the far side of town. The captain's only carrying out orders, but the location and arrangement of his tanks in the battle is confusing to U.S. aircraft. 2 miles to the west, American fighter planes soon appear.
Well, here came 4 P-47 fighter bombers. And they circled us once or twice.
All the rest of the Americans are on the other side of town, and from the air, it looks like Leach's men are opposing them.
Then they came back and made an attack run on my company. And they bombed me twice and strafed me twice.
Incredibly, Patton's tankers are unscathed.
Not a bullet hit a tank, not a bomb scratched the tank. I bet you they went home and reported great things, but nonetheless, there was none that touched me.
But the young captain's luck does not hold. as Abrams and the rest of the 37th press the attack on the village. 200 yards away, German riflemen continue firing from upper-story windows. Soon, another enemy bullet screams toward Leach's tank. It smashes into one of the vision slits in the tank's cupola.
Hit that thing, and that splattered glass and aluminum put about a 50-cent hole right through my jacket and gave me a wound under the arm that needed a bandage on it because it was a wet wound.
Despite his wounds, Leach remains in command of his company to the close of the battle at the end of the day. By evening, 37th Tank Battalion has cleared Bougainville and seized over 300 German prisoners. Nevertheless, General Patton is getting impatient. He wants Bastogne relieved, even if it means an all-night march after a hard day's fight. Christmas Eve, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge has been raging for more than a week, during one of the harshest winters anyone in Europe can remember. General George S. Patton's men are trying to achieve the impossible by racing 140 miles north through snow, ice, and hot German lead to free the 101st Airborne Division surrounded in Bastogne.
The men were being pushed to the extremes of endurance in combat, having to stay awake longer, alert longer, living out in the cold and the open, dealing with the elements constantly, in a situation where you just could not find warmth.
General Patton is not in a holiday mood. As he maps the progress of his troops toward Bastogne, he confides in his diary, "This has been a very bad Christmas Eve. All along our line, we have received violent counterattacks. Patton refuses to fall short of his promise to arrive in Bastogne as soon as possible and calls for something unexpected. He orders the Reserve Combat Command of 4th Armored, the unit that fought all day for Bougainville, to make an end run in the middle of the night. Indications are that the path to Bastogne is clearer on the left of the division. Injured the day before, Captain Jimmy Leach's men wake him up in the middle of the night. No rest for the weary or the wounded.
We got orders, and the orders were that at midnight we're going to move the entire combat command around the south end of the other two brigades that are attacking, or the other two combat commands, and come up on the left flank of the left one, which is CCB, and resume the attack.
Leach and the Reserve Command march all night and manage to come up on the left of the division by first light. It's Christmas morning, a cheerless holiday for both the men of the 4th Armored and American soldiers stuck in Bastogne, directly in front of Patton's men.
I mean, it's hard enough for a guy to be away from home, especially be away from your family, but at Christmas, and under these fighting conditions, and this kind of an intense fight, man, that's brutal.
All 3 combat commands spend Christmas Day locked in vicious combat. That evening, Jimmy Leach's battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, gets orders to push toward the enemy stronghold of Seabray the next day. Abrams is a 30-year-old with a reputation as a tough fighter who can get the job done.
Patton himself said there's only one tanker better in this army than myself, and that's Creighton Abrams. So that's a heck of a recommendation coming from the expert.
The next morning, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams takes up a position on a hill east of Seabray. But instead of attacking his assigned target, Abrams believes that a drive directly ahead through the Belgian village of Assenois could open a direct path to Bastogne, just 1 mile away.
And what Abrams does is he calls an artillery barrage on Assenois, and his plan is to lift it as soon as his troops reach the area.
Soon, 3 of Abrams' tanks churn through Assiniboia, with Lieutenant Charles Bulge's Sherman in the lead. 500 yards ahead, German soldiers in the town and beyond are still battling viciously, trying to repulse the American drive.
And basically what the commander, this Lieutenant Bulge, is doing is he's firing into the woods to his left and right, but not stopping. His concept is, let's just keep their heads down while we move forward.
Finally, the lieutenant spots what looks like an American walking towards him, but it could be a German imposter.
Bulge says, I'm Lieutenant Bulge with the 4th Armored Division. Tell me who you are, I will open fire. And the guy says, I'm Corporal Miller with the 101st Airborne. Thank God you're here. And with that, Bastogne is relieved. The link has been made between the 4th Armored and the 101st.
And when he pulled in to what is now called McAuliffe Square in the center of downtown Bastogne, on his tank, the Cobra King, it represented the moment of greatest triumph.
The siege of Bastogne may be over, but General Patton still faces stiff challenges in the Battle of the Bulge. His men must keep the corridor to Bastogne open, and at the same time, help push Hitler's forces back where they came from. To collapse the Bulge, there'll be many more firefights in the days ahead. January 1945. Bastogne is firmly in American hands, but for General George S. Patton's army, the Battle of the Bulge is still raging. For the ground pounders and the infantry, the nightmare of battle is only made worse by the misery of winter. Minnesota native Ruel Long, a soldier in the 90th Infantry Division, knows firsthand just how hard it is to live and fight in sub-zero weather.
In the morning, your canteen would always have some ice on the top of it. We'd have to light our key ration cartons and melt the ice in the canteen so we could use it to drink and to shave. And we were still going around in leather boots. And we were losing men. We were frostbite, trench foot.
January 9th, 1945, day 25 in the Battle of the Bulge. The 761st Tank Battalion is pushing toward the German-held village of Tillet, Belgium, part of the 3rd Army's drive to close the Bulge in the American line.
There's basically a bulge within the Battle of the Bulge now that the Americans are occupying. And Patton is sending the 11th Armored Division, the 6th Armored Division, a number of infantry divisions in there to fight some of the heaviest fighting, even worse than the fighting going into Bastogne.
The 761st is an African-American unit that fought as part of Patton's army for weeks in the soggy Lorraine region, and now in Frigid, Belgium.
These guys fought hard. They fought well. They were well led. They were dedicated. And there's something that every American should be proud of.
This morning, 761st tanks are approaching a distant tree line. William McBurney is a 21-year-old gunner from New York City. His tank is covering the far left flank.
And we went into this open field and was going forward, and it was very deep snow. And they were hidden in the trees.
800 yards ahead from the tree line, German infantrymen and a Tiger tank open fire. McBurney fires back, but then the American tank hits a mine. It looks like a death sentence. The tank won't move, and they're in an open field with no cover.
Tank commander, he jumped out, and I got out, and Smitty, he came behind me, and we hollered at Willie to jump out. He got killed in the tank from a machine gun bullet. We started crawling to get away from where the Tiger tank was. And they were coming up on us think about 1,000 yards or better that we crawled and we were shooting soldiers and whatnot.
Finally, an American P-38 fighter plane appears overhead.
It came out of nowhere. It knocked the tank out, then it came back over and tipped its wing and took off. And I was thankful for that. I'll never forget that plane, P-38.
McBurney will later receive a Bronze Star for his tenacious fighting. The rest of Patton's men continue to push the Nazis back to where they started. As the Bulge shrinks in the middle of January, Patton visits a hospital in Luxembourg. Lieutenant Roger Boaz, a forward artillery observer who's battled his way across France in the 4th Armored Division, is laid up with bronchial inflammation. Patton enters his ward.
And he turned to me and he said in his high voice, "What's the matter with you, boy?" And I said, "I have bronchitis, sir." And he looked at me a minute and he said, "What outfit are you in, boy?" And I said, 4th Armored Division, sir. Whole attitude changed. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Lieutenant, you had your share of hard work. You stay here as long as you have to."
Patton then moves down the line to a lieutenant who's due for an amputation. He wants to pin a silver star on the young officer for bravery. Patton asks his aide to produce one.
And he started reaching in his pockets, one after another. He said, "Sir, I don't have one." And Patton again went into one of his profane periods of dressing this chap down. Went on for quite a while. I'm sure this man never forgot it. And an hour later, a full colonel from the staff came with a silver star for the lieutenant, and ice cream for all of us, and the next day the lieutenant was dead.
Throughout the first weeks of 1945, American forces continue the struggle in the Ardennes forest, turning the tide of battle in favor of the Allies. By the last week of January, the weakened Nazis have been pushed back virtually to where they started.
The Battle of the Bulge is Hitler's really last gamble, last punch at the Allies. And it's Patton who punches back and shows Hitler to be a pretty lousy boxer. He destroys what's left of the offensive power of the German army. He's leaving almost nothing to defend Germany. And the victory's really his.
It has quite possibly been Patton's finest hour, especially the relief of Bastogne. In a letter to his wife on December 29th, Patton makes no bones about his pride in this accomplishment. The relief of Bastogne is the most brilliant operation we have thus far performed, and is, in my opinion, the outstanding achievement of this war. Now the enemy must dance to our tune, not we to his.
George Patton, in many respects, is viewed by posterity as a general who accomplished the impossible.
But the general knows this is no time to rest on his laurels. The enemy is still fighting and still deadly. The Bulge may have collapsed, but the war is not over. George S. Patton must now regroup his forces and ready them for a dagger thrust into the heart of Nazi Germany. The combat ahead is sure to be every bit as desperate and brutal. For the enemy will now be fighting for his homeland, on his homeland.